The Trial of Galileo, the Catholic Church's opposition to Galileo's heliocentric theory and its broader stance on science versus faith. Imagine a world where you're at the center of the universe. The sun, moon, stars, and planets revolve around you. This was the common belief for centuries, a view held by both scholars and the powerful Catholic Church. It was a comforting thought. Humans were at the heart of God's creation, with everything else in the heavens dancing around them. But then came Galileo Galilei. Galileo wasn't an ordinary man. Born in Pisa in 1564, he had a mind that didn't accept things at face value. Instead, he sought proof. What could be observed? What could be measured? He was curious about the heavens, and as he gazed up, he couldn't help but question what people had long taken for granted. Was Earth really the center of everything? The spark of controversy. In the early 1600s, Galileo got his hands on a new invention, an improved telescope. This device allowed him to see the skies in ways no one else had before, and what he saw blew his mind. He discovered moons orbiting around Jupiter. These weren't revolving around Earth as the Church had always said. He saw the phases of Venus similar to those of our moon, which made it clear that Venus was orbiting the Sun. All of this was fascinating, but it posed a big problem. If these planets and moons weren't revolving around the Earth, then maybe, just maybe, Earth wasn't at the center of the universe after all. Galileo became a champion of the heliocentric theory, the idea that the Earth and all the planets revolved around the Sun. This idea wasn't new. It had been proposed by Copernicus decades earlier. But it was Galileo with his telescope and evidence who could really shake the foundations of belief. The Church reacts. At this time, the Catholic Church was incredibly powerful. It wasn't just a religious authority. It held sway over politics, science, and culture. And the Church's view of the universe was clear. Earth, and by extension humanity, was the center of God's creation. Galileo's heliocentric theory was seen not just as a challenge to scientific understanding, but as an outright threat to the Church's authority. To make matters worse for Galileo, the Church had just gone through the Protestant Reformation. The Church was on edge, cracking down on any ideas that seemed to go against its teachings. This was the environment Galileo was walking into when he published his works supporting heliocentrism. In 1616, the Church took a clear stance. Copernicus's heliocentric model was officially condemned. Galileo, seeing the rising tensions, was warned to abandon his support of this theory. He was ordered to stop teaching and discussing the idea that the Earth revolved around the Sun. For a while, Galileo complied, at least publicly. Galileo's defiance, but Galileo wasn't one to sit quietly forever. Years later, in 1632, he published his most famous work, Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems. This book cleverly presented arguments for both the traditional geocentric, Earth-centered, and the heliocentric, Sun-centered models. It was written in the form of a conversation between characters, one of whom clearly represented the Church's views and was portrayed as somewhat foolish. This was too much for the Church. Galileo had not only defied their orders, but he had also mocked their stance in his book. He was summoned to Rome to stand trial before the Inquisition, a powerful and often feared branch of the Church responsible for investigating and punishing heresy. The Trial of Galileo. In 1633, Galileo, now nearly 70 years old, faced the Inquisition. The trial was a tense and dangerous moment in his life. If he were found guilty of heresy, the punishment could be severe, even death. The Church accused Galileo of teaching and supporting the heliocentric model, directly disobeying the orders given to him years earlier. Galileo defended himself, arguing that the heliocentric model was just a theory, something to consider, not something he was asserting as absolute truth. But the Church wasn't swayed. They declared Galileo guilty of heresy. However, instead of sentencing him to death, perhaps out of respect for his age and stature, they forced him to publicly renounce his views. On his knees, Galileo was made to declare that the Earth did not move, that the Sun revolved around it, and that his previous support of the heliocentric theory was wrong. Legend has it that after making this statement, Galileo muttered under his breath, "Eppur si muove," and yet it moves. Whether or not he actually said these words, the phrase has become famous, symbolizing Galileo's belief in scientific truth, even in the face of overwhelming opposition. House arrest and legacy. As part of his sentence, Galileo spent the remaining years of his life under house arrest. But even confined to his home, his mind kept working. He continued to write and conduct scientific experiments, laying the groundwork for modern physics. It wasn't until over 350 years later, in 1992, that the Catholic Church formally admitted that Galileo had been right. Pope John Paul II acknowledged the Church's mistake, recognizing that science and faith could coexist. The trial of Galileo wasn't just about astronomy. It represented a broader conflict between two ways of thinking, science and faith. On one side, you had the Church, which saw itself as the guardian of truth. For centuries, the Church had provided answers to the biggest questions about life, the universe, and humanity's place in it. Questioning those answers felt like questioning God himself. On the other side was science, an emerging force in the Renaissance, pushing boundaries and asking new questions. Scientists like Galileo were beginning to say, let's not just accept what we've always been told. Let's observe, let's test, let's find the truth through evidence. For many, the conflict between science and faith seemed like a battle. One had to be right, and the other had to be wrong. But as we've learned through history, the two can coexist. Faith can inspire people to search for truth, and science can help us understand the wonders of creation.